Welcome to Talk to Me on GAN TV. My name is Malik Lenzonzo. Tonight, another great conversation on U.S. Africa Summit. For those who don't know, the United States Africa Leaders Summit 2022 was an international conference held in Washington, D.C. from December 13 to 15. The summit was hosted by the United States President Joe Biden and attended by leaders from 49 African states, as well as the heads of African Union Commission. So that is actually what we're going to be talking about. With me on this conversation will be my friend Gustavo Envela to help me dissect some of the points and the importance of this summit. So let's begin. All right, welcome, my friend. Welcome, Mr. Gustavo Envela.
It's always good to see you, Malik. Had a great holiday, as I did with my loved ones here in Washington, D.C.
You are aware of that summit that took place in DC. Like I say in the introduction, it was on the 13 to 15. There was a almost 3 days summit between the United States and Africa. You were aware of that, right? I didn't hear it.
I was. Apparently, you had. Is the mic still muted on your end?
There's an issue with the mic. I think do you have another electronic open lines?
There might be. There might be another phone. I mean, the only thing that's open here. First of all, I have an open mind about everything. You know that. But there might be a phone that might be open somewhere here. But I can hear you now.
Yeah, but when I'm talking, I can hear myself. That's equal.
Yeah, the only thing that's on now is the computer may have been on, but I think that's been turned off. As you know, we're working. The area that I live in, they're doing some major construction, so we've had some issues with
I think it's something that we open. It's too electronic. I don't know. Did you say the computer is closed?
I believe the computer's closed.
Turn off. Okay. All right. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn myself off. I'm going to turn my microphone off. Mute my microphone. Then when you speak, I turn it off. When I speak, I turn my off.
I'm going to surrender all control to your show because, as everyone knows, you are the man.
I wish. Okay, so let's dive into this very quick. My question was, about your sense of a summary about this summit, and then we can maybe go into details because this is one of the most important summit. Unfortunately, it took another 8 years from the Obama administration to get another summit. What is your perspective? Maybe some kind of summary report on this summit in overall, report about this summit.
First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So my assessment, first of all, I want to congratulate Joe Biden and his administration for picking up where Barack Obama left off, albeit it was 8 years. That's 2 Olympics, by the way, every 4 years. But it was an Olympic effort to really bring in all of these individuals from disparate parts of the continent to converge in Washington, D.C. at the end of the year in the midst of a pandemic. I think that the U.S. Africa Summit, if I could give it a grade, is probably about a C. We all know that the hidden agenda was really to try to thwart China's influence and impact on the continent. Russia with this group called Wagner, and there's an excellent article in the New York Times that talked about the influence of Russia, particularly the Central African Republic. And so my focus would be that the U.S. needs to speak to Africans as co-equals and co-partners, and not speak in a paternalistic way. And I'm hoping that when President Biden takes a trip out to sub-Saharan Africa, he's yet to name the country, that he does so in a way that's open, honest. I do have some concerns, Malik, with regard to the fact that the U.S. is going to be giving $55 billion over 3 years. All I can say is I know that the people of Ukraine who have suffered so much under the oppressive Russian regime, that they've received a lot more for the entire country than the entire continent. I think they're probably close to about maybe $500 or $600 billion, but that's a whole nother issue. Africans deserve to be at the same table.
It's not actually a different issue. We're here to kind of tackle all these points because, as you know, it's very important to really draw the line where the line needs to be drawn, because we're dealing with a continent versus a country when it comes to the aid. We want to remind America that Africa is a continent. It's not a country. And we also have serious security issues. Terrorism still ramping in some part of the Africa. So we will talk about that. Don't worry about it. We get into that. Um, you know, uh, with this issue with microphone will really give us trouble on this show today. Somehow, no, I turn your microphone down because when both of us talk, it's difficult to hear one another. So I have to turn yours off for minutes. When I finish, I switch it out. Yeah. So basically, what I was trying to say is that is an excellent point when it comes to the criticism about this America, standing up. Some people call last minute, and when a question was asked to the Biden administration about whether this action or this summit is a way to kind of rebound, because this is a reaction to the China, Beijing and Moscow presence in Africa. That question was kind of downplayed. They wanted to focus on the America, African America, Africa and America, or U.S. America, U.S. and Africa relationship. So but the elephant in the room is eventually, obviously, the presence of China and the investment that China is continuing to do in terms of infrastructure and all that. So I'll let you, probably you wanted to finish your point. Go.
Yeah, what I like to say is that I know that in talking with some of these heads of state behind the scenes and some of their ambassadors, is that these African leaders came here with the intention of listening to what the Biden administration has to say. But in all honesty, they felt it's the same rhetoric, the same promises made, economic sustainability. But what they really felt is they just didn't want to be talked down to. They didn't want the U.S. to say, you have to choose between us or China, or us and Russia. And that as sovereign countries, now I'm just telling what other leaders have said, as sovereign countries, they have the right to make decisions. We all know that China has itself what they call a China debt trap, where they're giving so much money to these folks, they're now wondering whether or not they're going to make a return on investment. My concern is that the African continent does not turn into a Chinese plantation.
Well, you know, let back it up a little bit with that, Chinese plantation, because everybody knows that Chinese have done some great stuff in terms of building infrastructures. I'm not here playing playing the Chinese advocates here, but let's be honest and pragmatic. The Chinese have done a lot of stuff, and as a matter of fact, when you hear, because when we call African leaders to come in Washington D.C., it looks like, like some people would say, we just bring the leaders to tell them, what they need or what to do. But the Africans' needs are pretty clear, pretty clear when it comes to what they need. We know that, there's the debt that is on top of the line. The cancellation of the debt is something. There's food security is another thing. And for Africa to develop, we need to build infrastructures. This is clear stuff, And if another, if we started by saying that it took 8 years before we even have a summit between African. So all of this time, the gap, somebody have to fill that gap. So you're not going to accuse China to be to create some kind of plantation when nobody's doing anything. And you have one of the most vibrant when it comes to young people trying to do something. They need investment, and investments have to be also correlated with infrastructures. So at one point, yes, we don't want some of the practices that come with Chinese help. Help. But Beijing is clear when it comes to helping. They want to spread wealth. They want actually, some other country that were not even able to pay back the debt. There was some kind of debt cancellation. But that's something that America, still I don't see clearly. The America going to the, working with the IMF and the World Bank to trying to at least the debt. What can we cancel the debt for some countries that cannot even pay the debt, so that they can engage in this development that everybody want look for?
Yeah, I know that in talking once again with folks who are actively running countries, leaders, their ambassadors, their charge d'affaires, their public relations people, their concern was that China and the U.S.-China battle right now, because everyone knows that the Biden administration, with regard to national strategy, is to outcompete China and to contain Russia. And so, as an athlete, I can appreciate the competitive. We also know that Chinese have done things to cut corners. Now, with regard to infrastructure, and what I meant by plantation, I know if anyone can Google human rights abuses of Africans by Chinese employers, but once again, the African continent, men, women were stolen from the African continent and brought to the U.S. So we can always, keep things in perspective. The question is, in the 21st century, what are we going to do? We want to have highways. We want to have clean water. We want to have schools. We want to have education. We want to have hospitals. I also find it quite ironic, Malik, because you are a learned man on African politics, why many of these African leaders, when they become ill, they don't go to a hospital in Lagos. They don't go to a hospital in Lusaka. They go to hospitals in Zurich, London, Madrid. Now, if African leaders have to go overseas to get medical care, what does that say about the type of medical care they're getting? And more importantly, the confidence that they have in those whom they often bring in. For example, in Equatorial Guinea, a lot of the physicians are Cubans. Our country, as you know, is a former Spanish colony. But I have some real concerns about that. So China's doing some great things. The U.S. is trying to play catch up. I support the U.S. in its endeavors to try to speak as co-partners and not in a paternalistic way, because we are dealing with 21st century leaders who are not supplicant, who understand the importance of budgeting. But as you know, Malik, some of our leaders in the African continent are more concerned about limousines, mansions, plane sizes, and what hotel room they got to stay in while they're out here in Washington, D.C., rather than are they feeding their people, clothing their people, and educating them. So it's all about perspective. So Africans, you got to clean your act up. America, go forth and conquer, but do so in a respectful way.
Once you use the word conquer, then it's kind of scary. I don't like that word conquer. But when you see what's going on, and I can tell that the U.S. trying to demonstrate that Africa is more than a battleground, economically or military. They want to downplay the fact that this is not a competition, and that's exactly what I have a problem with. It doesn't have to be a competition, because when we see history before, there's a history between the United States and Africa, the continent of Africa. And I don't want to go back on our previous conversation on what America owed to Africa. Let's say it's a clear, you just look at the diaspora that everybody's talking about to understand, that we have a deep and very tight, meaningful relationship that need to be highlighted. So I don't want the U.S. to step up trying to help the continent of Africa in a reaction to China or to Russia. I want them to do it genuinely, knowing that our people have contributed so much to the United States. Yeah, that's the way we want to see it. We don't want Africa to be another Cold War battleground for those so-called superpower. I don't know what you think about that.
I think anytime we're talking, Malik, about asymmetrical power, remember the U.S. has been a democracy for almost 250 years. Many of these African countries, as you know, and I can speak of Equatorial Guinea, gained its independence on October 12th, 1968. Some of these countries may be 70 years old. Now, that's not an excuse to say that, oh, they need some time to catch up on democracy. The African democracy is different. When you have most of these countries, Malik, that have had leaders that have been around for half a century, or their children have been around, even in your country of Gabon, this kind of transgenerational nepotism is nauseating and it's disappointing, and frankly, it's embarrassing, because you find that most of these leaders, first of all, they put their cousins, their uncles, maybe even their pool boy in a position of authority. And we need to, and there's nothing wrong with being a pool boy. When I said conquer, I mean conquer in terms of going ahead and conquering the mentality that Americans have, is that we're going to go there and tell Africans what to do on their continent. Well, why would they? Who wants to have that feeling of, you're going to come into my house, tell me where I can rearrange the furniture, and then say, we'll give you some crumbs? Africans no longer need to take crumbs. We're self-sufficient. We live in a multipolar world, but we don't live in a world where you have Big Brother telling the children what to do. We're co-equal, and I know that Africans wanted to be treated as such. As for the diaspora, it's unfortunate that much of the diaspora people are individuals who want to go back to their country, but fear of being locked up, executed, or whatever. So African leaders need to create a climate for those of us who want to go back without fear of assassination, families being harassed. So that tribal mentality, and more importantly, the fear of losing power mentality, has something that the African leaders must contend to, and they must be genuine and wanting to welcome those of us who have been forced to live into exile in countries that have taken us in. The United States of America has been great to my family, but I want to go back to my home of Equatorial Guinea.
Again, that's another great point. Because this recent summit, we heard a lot of talk around the African diaspora. And we have to make sure that when the administration, any administration in the United States, when they deal with African countries, any African countries or the continent, that point have to be clearly stated, that a country that does not treat its citizen, especially those living in the United States, that can bring so much to the table, and just like you said, bright minds that end up just be here, stay here. Not to say that here is America is not a great place to be, but how many people can do what you can do? 1,000 million of them, and so your help on a continent will be more appreciated than here, for example. So folks like yourself will be scared or fear for their lives just by going back on your own continent, back home. So that has to be clearly stated. And I know, we're getting to the point where America cannot even talk about this humanitarian issues, and because they want to be politically correct. But America has a track record to champion these issues. It has to be clear. We've seen I don't know about your country, but in my country, we've seen Gabonese American being locked up, sometimes just for their political views. That's have to be changed. And when that occurred, we want to see United States step up and say, hey, listen, what's going on here? And we've been seeing a lot of our folks going to jail just because they say something that the government didn't like. So I think going forward, we want to see more and more America taking the diaspora in consideration, not necessarily in this kind of events, but we have to have a say, a voice, if they want people that in the future can work with them and support their interests just like they want. Because if you look around, it looks like that's what they want nowadays. The fact that China is getting ground and thank God they have a diaspora that is completely in tune with them, in tune with American politics. But we have to make sure that we as a diaspora also inform America that that the democracy piece cannot be left out, because now it looks like they are pushing entrepreneurship and all kind of stuff. That is good, but we cannot leave the humanitarian piece outside, because our people still suffer on the continent.
I agree. They call it brain drain when you have intellectuals that'll leave a country for someone else. And these are people, I remember, for example, in Macias Nguema, that he killed people who just for wearing glasses or intellectuals. Can you imagine targeting people who are educators, who are ministers, simply because they are literate? When you have that as your framework, you're dealing with people who are buffoons. Actually, no, that's actually an insult to buffoons, because you're killing the people who will help build your country's educational apparatus, the future lawyers, doctors. And seems to be a pathology with African leaders today who have their diaspora, whether in the US, Europe, France, Australia, all around the world. The diaspora, it's a spreading. You have to ask, why do these individuals and their families have to flee? People say, well, go back to Africa. Well, I'd like to, but if I go back there, I could be killed. Well, then, so where do people like you and I fit? We're here in the States, and I want to thank the cities of Salem, Oregon, where I was raised, Stanford University, where I went to school, Los Angeles, California, where I spent 20 years of my life. My two daughters were born, Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, the last 7 years, and Washington, D.C., which I've been coming to since 1985. But my citizenship is with Equatorial Guinea. And so I call upon African leaders to stand up for the African Union to have forums in which diasporans can truly be engaged. Because people like you and I, Malik, we could easily turn our back on our countries, go work in corporate America, and say, why do the grief? But the reality is that we are sons of Africa. Our parents were fathers and mothers of Africa, and we have a duty to do what we can to make the next generation a little bit more palatable. I'll be 55 next month, and I lived half a century. My entire life, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea has been run by one family, the Ngemists. That's about to change, but look how the country, like yours, Gabon, at what cost? The hundreds of thousands of people killed, the hundreds of thousands of people displaced, the money that's been plundered by the National Treasury. So people can talk about America all they want, or the Chinese, but Africans need to clean up their own house. These leaders are doing nothing but creating failed states in the 21st century. And that's not anything that people in Washington, D.C., Moscow, or Beijing. You have the folks who want to plunder the national treasury, but the plunder of the national treasury was something that was going on internally before these other folks came in.
Absolutely. 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 Listen, now, I think one of the piece that also have to be addressed is the French Africa relationship. And by French, I mean Francophone, so-called Francophone Africa. That dynamic has to be, we have to openly discuss this stuff in relationship with America, because America, the United States, have a role to play in this, because there's no excuse to act like they don't know what's going on. And we know, when you look history, you take an example, for example, 80, you know that whenever a country like France had to punish a country with predominantly black people, America has to be behind to support. You read this story, if you're a student of history, you know that France cannot have the strength, or the power that it has on some of these 14 countries of Africa if America is not, keeping quiet, seeing everything that's going on, but not saying anything. Then you're going to go back around and talk about democracy. So if you, criticize this country not being democratic, of course, the new generation want, countries with free election, and human rights, all kind of stuff. But on the other hand, you're seeing those dictators, and the question that's, we continue to ask is, who is supporting them? Now, behind them, for the most part, especially the so-called Francophone Africa, there's France behind it. And France happened to be a democratic country itself. How come we don't understand? How come you are a democratic country, but yet you continue to support, despots, people who actually come to power with, fraudulent elections, and this is something that everybody know is taking place. So at one point, I think this is an important conversation that we need to have. But on that table, we have to invite the United States to take its responsibility, because if you're the leader of this world, you're gonna have to be fair to everybody. What you think?
I agree. And I think that whether you're talking about, and this isn't an anti-American or an anti-France, this is just pro-facts. When you have puppets, and most of these African leaders are puppets of someone, they're accountable to someone. Most of these guys had training somewhere in the US or Europe. And so for those of us who have loyalties to the US, that's nothing new. Now, the question is, when you hear the term national security interest, what that really means, Malik, is that your country in Africa, we'll say Kenya, for example, you have diamonds. We want your diamonds. And we're going to try to get them in a way that's reasonable, but we might have to use other means in order to get it. National security interest means that a country has something that the United States, Europe, China want. And so in the case of equatorial Guinea, it's oil. Oil makes the world go round, although I'm a proponent of clean energy and ways to do that. But we have to realize that most of these African leaders got there through brutality, assassination, tribalism, and in some cases, genocide. It's a whole kind of Stockholm syndrome, PTSD thing that we have to really undo. Because for those of us who hope to lead and lead in a servant leadership capacity, we have to realize that beyond feeding, clothing, and educate our folks, they've been traumatized by seeing relatives killed. And we have to, as Africans, value the lives of fellow Africans. It's no different than in Chicago or Atlanta or LA when you hear about black on black crime. I'm tired, Malik, of hearing about African on African time with weapons often purchased by U.S. folks, whether it's the Victor Bouts of the world, who was recently released. We have to stop killing other Africans because I'm going to tell you a little secret. There's some people who don't mind when other black people are killing other black people because then they don't have to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. But one of my question is what America have to lose, by working with this new generation of new generation new leaders of Africa that understand U.S. politics, that are all pro America. Has to lose by supporting those individuals in Africa on the continent, so that we can have you know people on both sides that understand the rule of engagement and all of those principles of democratic principle. I want to probably call on the kind of relationship that the U.S. have with Israel, for example. Israel being a democratic country, there's a very good relation with Israel. Why can Africa or some countries in Africa have the same kind of relationship with America?
Well, I think what happens, Malik, let's just be honest. People who look like you and I, sometimes people make assumptions. And I've learned to realize that I'm just going to speak truthfully and I'll let it be the other person's problem to figure it out. We're problem solvers, Malik. And this show speaks candidly. You've offered a forum for many people. Can you believe that you had all these African leaders here in town? None of them came on your show? Maybe they're concerned about their limousine or whatever, but they were here on a show where you had a platform. And so, what does that say about them? So, America, you need to realize that the new generation of African leaders were literate. We understand the tenets of democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, good governance, civil society, stability, free, fair, and transparent elections. But we also understand the role of humanitarianness and also understand the role of dignity and respect. And I think when all is said and done, people just want to be respected and know that they're valued. And they're not being said something to their face and then laughed behind their back.
Absolutely. That's the absolute fact. And going back to what you just said, can you imagine the talking about our leaders, coming to in town and not even paying attention to their own citizens. I did, and both of us work on those invitation and to our leaders. And the invitation was sent almost everywhere. But for the case that we're speaking, your country, the Equatorial Guinea, there was an invitation sent to them, and even my own country, Gabon, an invitation was sent. But there was to this up to today, there was actually no answer. I listed the answer to say, what, we've received your request. We probably won't be available for that conversation. That would probably be a subject for another time. Just administrative. But and we put this stuff in information, early. And that was almost all of them, and that is just it speaks volume to exactly what we're talking about. People think this is funny, but it's not funny to us. It shows how our own leaders don't, African leaders don't pay attention to their own people. And it's so sad.
Yeah, and that's true. So I'm going to make a very clear point. It's Africa for Africans, but most of the African leaders that we have are jokes. These are people that you would not want to have run a 7-Eleven in the most remote part of South Dakota. And I love South Dakota tremendously. But then you give them all the power, weaponry, and luggage to run countries. And so I'm pleading with African leaders today. For those of you who've been in power for more than 15 years, cultivate a new generation of leaders. Don't be afraid of ceding power to someone outside of your family, because this mouse trap of chasing our tail over and over and over again. In our generation, we may not see that kind of forward thinkingness. And we also have to allow those individuals who want their external actors, who want particular leaders who are friendly. We know it's politics. It's a game, the art of science. And so I want all African leaders to say that we look forward to you appearing on Malik's show. Malik's a nice guy. He would just ask you open-ended questions. You can answer his questions. He's not good. I believe you me. He's not, his bite is a lot bigger than his bark. And so when all is said and done, for those of you who exhibit great brutality, why can't you just simply answer a few questions? There's no brutality. We're not coming here with machetes. We're just coming here with questions wanting you to ask and answer.
But believe me, it's really questionable. And what Gen TV, with respect to myself and my partners, including Mr. Envela, what we, our request was actually to give them an opportunity, to actually, kind of display or if you will, to speak about the bilateral, relationship with between their country and the United States, and also to kind of, speak directly to the diaspora, because any African diaspora in the United States is it's a group of people that to be taken seriously. So that was it was in that spirit. It was in that spirit that we thought it was a good idea to sit down with those leaders and have a chat. But if you're not doing something wrong, you have no fear whatsoever. But if you're fleeing your own citizens, that means, somehow maybe you're not confident enough to be around them. So maybe something's wrong. I'm not saying you did something wrong, but I'm just saying, that speaks volume to the kind of leader you are. So let me go ahead and read this very quick. It is something in the overview, on the, State Department website, something that they say about Africa. I'm going to read it and then I will let you comment on it. So it goes like this. Africa will shape the future, not just the future of African people, but the world, rooted in the recognition that Africa is a key geopolitical player. President Joe Biden invited leaders from across the African continent to Washington, D.C. on December 13 to 15, 2022, for the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit. President Joe Biden believed that U.S. collaboration with African leaders, as well as its civil society, business, diaspora, women, youth leaders, is essential to unlock potential and decisive, to unlock the potential of this decisive decade. So when you hear, and this is on the U.S. Department website, when you hear, such things, it looks like there is a willingness to really want to work with Africa, and here they're talking about civil society, business, the business world, women, youth leaders. When you see that, did that give you a hope that something maybe is going to happen, or it's going to just be empty promises, just like business as usual?
Well, I want to draw upon my 32 years of experience, Malik. I first came to Washington, D.C. in 1990. I met with the late Congressman Tom Lantos' legislative assistant, a gentleman by the name of Hans Hograff. And Tom Lantos was the very first person who wrote a letter. He was a member of the Congressional Committee on Human Rights Caucus. And he wrote a letter to President Biden saying that I recently met with someone, me, who really detailed some of these issues with regard to human rights abuses. And John Bennett, another ambassador to the U.S. who challenged Obiang, what I've come to realize is that rhetoric, after a while, becomes nauseating, and technocratic rhetoric is downright debilitating. For those of us who are men of action and women of action, we realize that Africa, the future of Africa, is really in the hands of women and the youth. For some reason, men have seemed to have tangled our country into a knot. And I think it's going to be the finesse, the discipline, and frankly, the we're not playing games of the youth that are going to have to untie this knot. I have two daughters, 22 and 28, both Americans, but they know what's going on in Africa. And this generation is very, very savvy. And so I would warn that these African leaders who want to trample on protests, who want to imprison individuals who supposedly are expressing the tenets that are embedded in the Constitution, African leaders, don't be afraid of the truth. Don't be afraid of dissent. Don't lock up journalists because you come off looking as weak, shallow, and terribly insecure. We have to secure the future of Africa. We have to invite young minds, bright minds, and women. I think women need to play a more active role on the African continent, and misogyny and tribalism and this cave-like mentality has to be tossed aside. So I hope that the African continent will have its own summit, and one in which they will address these issues. They've come to America, they've gone back to Africa, and let's see what's going to happen. I'm optimistic that the leaders, or so-called leaders, will come up with plans and a pact and a roadmap in which women and children, the youth, which are really the future, will have an imprint and an impact for the 21st century. Because our children, Malik, they are our emissaries of a future that we will never know.
Absolutely, absolutely, bro. Absolutely. Listen, you say it, and nobody says right. Just like you did. I wanted to come back about the point that you made earlier when it comes to the when we compare U.S. Engagement, so willingness to help Africa versus all the friends that they have. You're gonna see a country, talking about Ukraine. What's going on in Ukraine is terrible. Nobody will wage a war on anybody else, and it's terrible. But when you see it's one country compared to an entire continent, and before the war in Ukraine, Africa has been dealing with terrorism for for decades now. Now, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said this: Africa is a major geopolitical force. It's one that has shaped our past, it's shaping our present, and will shape our future. No, these are, it looks like nice words to Africa. If you take the continent as, a place that will shape the future of humanity, so why the African continent, still be treating like, almost like a second second citizen of this world.
Well, with all due respect to Secretary Blinken, I'm glad he went to Africa recently. As you know, prior to that, there was a lot of activity in my country, Equatorial Guinea, but there's been a real outreach. As someone whose father was a diplomat, as you know, my father is an ambassador to the UN and to DC. I find diplo speak sometimes can be paralyzing. I would have preferred that he used that Africa is a geopolitical vector, because vectors have magnitude and direction. Force, you could be talking about force majeures. You could be talking about brutal force, as we saw in Rwanda. My question is, Bill Clinton, with all the intelligence that you were given, all of the information that I provided on what was going on in Rwanda. I know you said later on that was a mistake and that you didn't know, but Mr. Clinton, with all due respect, African lives matter. And President Biden, I believe that you are a good man and that you want Africa to win. I think we need to reimagine, Malik, our generation, reimagine in Africa in which there are no despots, no dictators. We can go back and get our passports renewed with great facility because these guys are using anachronistic playbooks. They realize that they can't use their techniques from the 60s and 70s, but they're trying to do the 21st century. Time does not stand still. And for the people who want to stand still, they're going to get left behind. And so I'm always of the doctrine that good fortune favors the brave. And I'm glad, Malik, that I have a brave friend like you who is able to put it all on the line and realize that if it's to be, it's up to us.
Absolutely, it's up to us, and exactly, we have to make sure that we are participant and active participant in reshaping our world, whether we're here in the United States, our contribution here, but also back home, where our efforts, imagination, skills are needed. And I agree with you. We should never have a problem with going back home. Just because you say something that somebody didn't like, instead of come and debate you. And as I know who you are, you never shy out from any debates, any conversation. So if you disagree with Mr. Envela, request for a debate, open debate, and then we can talk pound to pound, and then that's what it is. And it's always educational. We don't do anything here with malicious intent to trying to hurt somebody. We are doing this so people can be more educated on some subject matter, and also we advocate for our societies to be even better. So what I'm gonna do is give you a chance to my dear friend. I know we've been here for almost 50 minutes without a break, and I'll as you always know, I like your insight. You were the senior political analyst here on GAN TV. We want to hear some kind of a conclusion on your side, and we kind of wrap it up on this issue that's keep going on in Africa. I'm talking about the most important issues to be focused on. Africa need the issue of food security to be addressed. We need investment and what is a technological investment infrastructure to kind of give a way to develop Africa. Nowadays we talk about AI technology. We have to be even in a more aggressive on that, a part of the infrastructure, building infrastructure that will actually allow young people, lots of young people, to be involved in this kind of stuff, AI, and other technology that will determine the future of this world. But also, I was a little bit disappointed because very less was there was less conversation about the depth that actually continued to cripple many countries in Africa. Nobody says anything about how America can play a role in trying to cancel out some of the unfair dates that continue to cripple in country, especially America. Because if China is doing it for countries that are not capable of paying back the dates, what can America do it? Knowing all the information that we know about our relationship, America have to be leading in that effort. That is a point that was a little bit disappointing. But I'm so grateful that after this conference, President Biden's gonna put some kind of schedule to go to Africa. But we want him to come to Africa with a clear agenda, not just empty talk. So I'm gonna let you give your own conclusion, and then we can get out of here.
And please support Gain TV, what Malik is doing. He's a good man, a great father, and an exceptional African. Well, as we get ready to begin a new year, it'd be remiss without me, first of all, wanting to wish all of you a prosperous and abundant 2023 in the African continent and throughout the world. And for those of you who are interested in Africa, we need your help. We don't have all the answers to all the multiplicity of issues, some of these issues which predate even our existence on Earth. But what we can do is we can try to move the needle forward. I think that bridging the digital divide is one way. I think trying to have more schools in terms of exchange students. Now, with regard to COVID, we've realized that distance learning and telelearning are phenomenal. And so, whether it's Stanford University, which you see in the background, forming a relationship with Malabo National University, I'd be all for that. I think that education is going to be the key. It's going to unlock it, but education that's real, sustainable, and one that solves problems. So I am optimistic that President Biden will do what he can. We can't cure all these problems in photo opportunities and luncheons and roundtables, but at least there are discussions taking place. And if anyone from the White House or any other African nation wants to appear on this show or talk to Malik or myself, we stand here with open arms. We are respectful and we enjoy dialogue. It's not about monologue, it's dialogue. And I hope that those individuals who claim to be leaders will be more thick-skinned and that all people are doing are lobbying words. And last I heard, no one ever got killed for listening too hard.
Absolutely, my friend. Well, we're gonna leave that right there with the quote. Very important. Okay, it was a pleasure to see you again, my friend. Like always, good conversation. I look forward to see you another on a different show. Always a great conversation when it comes to U.S. Africa politics and and what's going on in our world. So again, thank you for coming. And thank you for your perspective. We look forward to speak with you another time. As for me, my name is Malik Lenzanzo. Tonight's show was about our perspective on the U.S. Africa Summit. All right. So if you have questions, please send us your questions. If you have comments, but more importantly, like my friend Envela said, support Gain TV so we can continue to bring you some good perspective, our perspective on issues that issues that impact our world. Okay, so so thank you again, and viewership very important. Don't forget to support us, and we look forward to speak with you another time.